Welcome back to the channel, guys. Arthur here from Draft Media, here to talk about the biggest winners and losers from the 2022 NBA Draft. As honorable mentions, I would like to say that I think the Raptors, Lakers, and Mavericks had great drafts, but because they only selected one player in the second round, I won't talk about them in this video. Also, the Atlanta Hawks landing AJ Griffin at number 16 was the most surprising thing that happened in my opinion. The Hawks should be ecstatic with that outcome. And finally, the Pelicans landing Dyson Daniels and especially EJ Liddell at 41 are two great fits for their organization. Liddell will likely be looked at as the one who got away for the other 29 teams. With that being said, my biggest winner of the night, like many others, is the Detroit Pistons. It was the worst kept secret in the league that the Pistons absolutely loved Jaden Ivey, who they were able to select without giving up any assets. Pairing him alongside Cade Cunningham will instantly become one of the most dynamic backcourts in the league. However, their night didn't stop there. An unexpected trade between the Hornets, Knicks, and Pistons landed them the big man from Memphis, Jalen Duren. They were able to snag Duren by taking on Kemba Walker's contract, as well as including the future first-round pick they received from Portland in the Jeremy Grant trade. This provides the Pistons with a young center with great size who can be an elite role man and lob threat for Cade Cunningham and Jaden Ivey. Duren also brings a lot of potential defensively as one of the better shot blockers and overall interior defenders. And finally, with the 36th pick, they selected Gabriel Procida. It'll be interesting to see if the Pistons bring him over right away, but either way, he brings a versatile offensive game but will need to improve defensively. Moving on to the next biggest winner, the Houston Rockets. The Rockets took care of business with the third pick. They took whichever one of the big three was left on the board, which was ultimately Jabari Smith Jr. I think he's going to be a great fit for the Rockets and should be their power forward of the future. He provides floor spacing and defensive versatility with potential to create his own shot down the line. The Rockets also selected Tari Eason from LSU with the 17th pick, a player who they believe is the best defender in the draft. While I wouldn't agree with that statement by any stretch of the imagination, his versatility on both ends is undeniable. He's another wing who can play either forward position and gives the Rockets team some much needed depth. And finally, at number 29, they selected who I feel is the biggest steal of the draft, Ty Washington, as well as acquiring 2 second-round picks in the process. His ability to play on and off the ball effectively helps this Rocket team greatly. He fits in right next to Jalen Green in the backcourt, and it's well known that the Rockets have needed a true point guard all season. He had a rough year tainted by injuries, which has a lot to do with his underwhelming numbers, but I believe he's a much better shooter and passer than the numbers suggest, and he also brings an intriguing floater game and pick and roll ball handling. If the Rockets decide to not bring back Kevin Porter Jr., I believe long-term Ty Washington is more than capable of being their guy for years to come, whether it be as a starter or a backup point guard. Next up, I have the Orlando Magic. If you followed this channel, you know how high I am on Paolo Banchero. He was my number one pick all season, and to see the Magic making what I believe was the obvious choice is definitely a major win for them. Banchero, like I said, is the best player in the draft. He brings everything on the offensive end besides an elite three-point shot. But the Magic have needed a number one option on offense, and Paolo is that guy. You can run your offense through him in a variety of ways. He brings shot creation, a polished post game, and great passing vision. His defense is better than advertised, and again, I think it was a home run selection for Orlando. They also selected Caleb Houston at 32, which I'm not the biggest fan of, but I do understand the rationale. I think he's going to need a lot of work in the G League before he's able to step on an NBA court. If his shot becomes consistent as well as his perimeter defense, then this pick makes a lot of sense, especially in the second round. They also traded their 35th pick to the Lakers for cash considerations and a future second round pick, another move I wasn't too fond of on the Orlando side of it. But again, drafting Paolo was more than enough to make them winners of the draft. Next winner of the draft is the San Antonio Spurs. Again, if you follow this channel, you know how high I am on Jeremy Sohan. They selected him 9th overall, which is about where I expected him to go. I think he has all the potential in the world as a defender. To me, he's the most versatile and overall best defender in the entire class. He has elite physical tools and a high IQ on both ends. In my opinion, he has all NBA defensive potential and even defensive player of the year potential. Overall home run pick for the Spurs. And at number 20, a bit of a surprise that he fell this low, Malachi Branham was another great selection for the San Antonio Spurs. He brings an elite mid-range game and drew a lot of comparisons to Karis LeVert for good reason. Whether he starts or comes off the bench for the Spurs, his potential to be a microwave scorer is evident. And finally for the Spurs, Blake Wesley at 25 was a pick that felt almost like destiny. The Spurs had the draft capital to take a chance on a project player with the highest ceiling. He's a super athletic defender that San Antonio can take their time developing. And finally for the winners category, of course it's the Golden State Warriors. To land a player as talented as Patrick Baldwin Jr. with the 28th pick is the most Warriors thing ever. He had an injury-plagued season and his shooting splits were definitely not good, but we know he's a much better player than the numbers suggest, and he should be one of the biggest beneficiaries of NBA spacing. He comes into a Warriors franchise where he simply will not be needed, quite frankly. The Warriors have one of the best developmental and coaching staffs, which should help Baldwin reach his true potential in the background of their championship team. The Warriors also selected Ryan Rollins with the 44th pick, another guy I think has real NBA potential. He reminds me a lot of Derek White, and he's another super talented guy who can take his time developing in the background. And finally, the Warriors also selected Gui Santos from Brazil. Likely a draft and stash selection, but he brings good size and overall talent. Whether or not he ever comes over to the NBA remains to be seen, but the Warriors hit it out of the park per usual. Moving on to the losers of the draft, to no one's surprise, the biggest loser to me is the Sacramento Kings. I understand they were confident in Keegan as their guy and as the best player available, and certainly he fits the team better than Ivy or Sharp would have. But every other team would have selected Ivy at number 4. And knowing the enthusiasm that the Pistons and other teams like the Knicks and Wizards had for the pick, there's no excuse to not trade down to at least number 5. I have a hard time believing that the Pistons wouldn't at least offer the 5th pick with the first round pick they got from Portland in the Grant trade, which would have been a lot better for Sacramento. The expectation going into the draft for the Kings was walking away with Ivy and Collins. Instead, they just walked away with Keegan Murray. For a team that was so stubborn about including the 4th pick in a trade with Atlanta for Collins, this selection didn't make much sense to me. Personally, I would much rather have John Collins and AJ Griffin instead of just Keegan Murray. And to just make it clear, none of this is an attack on Keegan. I think he's going to be a really high-level starter for this team. The poor draft grade is because of the lack of value that the Kings got for the coveted 4th pick. Also, to make the night even worse, they traded away Jaden Hardy, who was the 37th pick, to the Dallas Mavericks for 2 future second-round picks. Now, not to say that he will become the same player, but it is very reminiscent of the Gary Trent Jr. trade. Hardy was viewed as a first-round talent from many, including myself. To have him there at 37 and to not keep him is just another head-scratching move by Sacramento. And finally, the Kings traded the 49th pick to the Cavaliers for the draft rights of Sasha Vezenkov, who was one of the best European players last year. Monty McNair seemed unsure himself if Sasha would come over this year, but he does have an NBA clause in his contract, and if he is able to come over, that is great value for the 49th pick. Also, signing Keon Ellis to a 2-way deal following the draft, in my opinion, was the best move Sacramento made all night. My next loser for the night is the Memphis Grizzlies. Coming into the draft, they were slotted at number 22 and 29. They ended up packaging both picks and sending them to Minnesota for the 19th pick, as well as a future second-round pick. Now, with this newly acquired 19th pick, they selected Jake LaRavia. The reason I don't understand this trade is because I believe LaRavia would have been there at 22 for them to select. So originally, I assumed they just wanted to save money by packaging both picks for one. But then they took on Danny Green's contract in the 23rd pick for DeAnthony Melton, a player who I think is a steal for the 76ers. Especially considering that Green likely won't play this year due to a torn ACL, and the Grizzlies potentially losing Tyus Jones, they could have kept Melton and saved the money that they will be paying an inactive Danny Green. With the 23rd pick, they selected David Roddy, a guy who I thought could be an early second-round pick at best, which was just another confusing move. I asked myself why not just keep the original 22nd and 29th pick and select LaRavia at Roddy anyways, and still keep Melton on your team instead of an injured Danny Green. They did make some solid selections in the second round to their credit with Kennedy Chandler and Vince Williams. And my final loser for the night was the Denver Nuggets. They selected Christian Braun with the 21st pick, a guy who I think will be a good player for their team, but I much rather would have liked Beauchamp here. But overall, the Braun selection isn't the worst thing in the world. The head scratcher comes with the 30th pick, Peyton Watson. Now, I understand Watson was a highly touted prospect coming into UCLA, a potential lottery selection, but in his one season for the Bruins, he struggled to find playing time, and when he did, he looked extremely raw. He finished the season averaging 3 points per game, and to me, he's 2 years away from being 2 years away. I would have liked a lot of other players here for the Nuggets, and Watson was not first-round talent in my opinion. They also drafted Kamagate with the 46th pick. I view him as a draft and stash prospect at this point, but I still expect him to find his way into the NBA at some point. Thank you guys for watching. Make sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel to join the Draft Media family.